Right, very sorry to say that there are a few moments in this podcast where my audio gets a little bit shaky. It's kind of just what happens when you're trying to record stuff on the road or when you buy cheap Amazon XLR cables. By the way, Amazon, if you're willing to sponsor NASP, we will retract that statement immediately and give so much love to the high quality audio accessories that you provide at such great value. Anyway, apologies for some of the audio drops and enjoy.
I mean, mate, if you could get Raducanu feeding Jack Draper like a strawberries and cream, yeah, you're on big money. Anyway, so if Southampton finish with 9 points, they should drop down to League One and they should bypass the Championship completely as punishment. What do we think about that? Absurd?
If you want to go down this route, if you finish with fewer than 10 points in a Premier League season, you have that number of points that you came away with in that Premier League season as a point deduction at the start of the Championship season.
Welcome along to Not Another Sports Pod, episode number 38 with myself, David, and Mr. Oliver Wilson. And our audio listeners, please go across to YouTube for this episode, because you will see in the background that Mr. Oliver Wilson, he's made it. He's in Magaland, he's in Miami, the sun's shining, the backdrop's obscene, it looks beautiful, Ollie. Work, pleasure, golf, what's the vibe this time around?
Work, because obviously we're out here doing Not Another Sports Pod with the Miami Heat Stadium right behind me. Pleasure, because...
For tax purposes, right? For tax purposes, it's a work trip.
It's a work trip. Pleasure, because we're in Miami and, 5 minutes away from Miami Beach, and the beauty of this city that stands alone, really, on the bottom of the state. And yeah, it's pleasure because it's just so freaking nice as well, mate. We're talking 27 degrees right now. We've got a beautiful backdrop. Had some sushi for brunch this morning. I mean, life is good suddenly. Life is very good indeed.
Man, it does look absolutely amazing. Yeah, not a part of America I know whatsoever, but yeah. Would you move to America? If you got?
I wouldn't. It would have to take the job to get me to move out here. Like, really good money working on something that I really wanted to work on. But I don't think I'd move here, no. It is a great country in very large aspects, and then there are a lot of things that put me off as well. It's very expensive, man. Very expensive.
Yeah, but everywhere is now.
Yeah, but I guess the first time I came to the States, we had a 2 to 1 pound to dollar ratio, which is... And we ain't anywhere near that. It's close to 1 to 1 than anything else, aren't we? And
Soros crashed the pound or whatever, and we're a long way away from that now. But Ollie, it does look absolutely awesome, mate. And is it a big sports? What's the Miami Heat? You just said that's the baseball, right?
Yeah,
that's the basketball.
Mate, that's the basketball. We've got Lionel Messi and Inter Miami, obviously just down the road. I mean, I'm staying in an apartment. David Beckham's apartment is the building next over at the top of the building, kind of thing. So I'm in Beckham country right now. We are scouting out around Miami to see if we can bump into Sir David himself. And then you've got Florida Panthers just around the corner. You've got the Miami Dolphins, one of the most famous teams in the NFL culturally, let alone as a sporting franchise. And the Miami Marlins as well, the MLB team. So it is a mecca of sport down here for sure.
Someone messaged me last week, Ollie, and said, why do you guys always make out you're impoverished sports journalists when you're all around the world all the time? So Ollie Wilson being parked next to David Beckham isn't doing much for our rep.
We're not renting this place, and we're not letting it out or anything like that. This is very much the brother-in-law-to-be's pad. So the brother-in-law-to-be has been kind enough to put us up here in this beautiful part of the world. So everything, David, as you know, everything has to be done on the cheap, but you just got to make it look. Fake it till you make it. That's what they say.
And are you managing to squeeze away from family duties and catch any sport?
We are going to go to a Heat game, the Florida Panthers game as well on Sunday next week against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So yeah, there's going to be a few sporting events to take in, which then makes the trip tax deductible, because it's all research for this pod, basically, mate.
I mean, Ollie, probably a conversation for off-pod in case HMRC ever scroll through the back catalogue of Not Another Sports Pod for those reasons. But yeah, I mean, when you're a sports journalist, one of the great things when you're, it's everything is sport. So everything you do in your life is potentially tax deductible. I think that's legitimate.
I mean, it's genuinely an interesting thing to come here. Like the the Heat have been riding the run the last few years with Jimmy Butler, who's kind of become a big mainstay in the NBA, and he's recently gone to the Golden State Warriors. So it's there could be a Not Another Sports Pod special on what the atmosphere is like around the Miami Heat and how easy it is to get tickets and what it's like in the arena with yet another Miami superstar leaving the Florida sunshine and heading up to Golden State instead. So there's always a story. There's always something. I mean, we're a fair bit of a way down from where the Players was taking place at TPC Sawgrass this weekend, but we're in the vicinity. We're in the correct state. There's golf galore around these parts as well. So I think the beautiful thing is it's much like politics. Everywhere you go, sport is always there, and there's always a good story to get into, as we know from our trips down to South America as well.
100%. We are recording this on a Tuesday afternoon UK time, so yeah, apologies to those that listen on their Tuesday commute into work, but it is what it is for the next couple of weeks. I think Ollie's going to be US side. Right, Mr. Wilson, let's dive in with the good stuff and what happened over the weekend. Ollie, is there a more beautiful footballing story than a football club backed by a gigantic, rich oil nation like Saudi Arabia winning a domestic cup? I mean, my goodness, that's what the beautiful game's all about, right? Like a Saudi-backed English football club winning the Carabao Cup, an energy drink-sponsored cup. I am, of course, joking. Newcastle, without a trophy for 70 years, which is bonkers when you think about the size of the football club, the fan base, the stature in the game, the reputation. Went 70 years without a trophy, but they beat Liverpool in the Carabao Cup final, and they should rightfully enjoy their moment.
Yeah, if you think about when we were growing up, not to get too kind of back in my day, but the quality of player that was running through that Newcastle side at various points. I mean, they've had some of the best centre-forwards that the early years of the Premier League had, in terms of Andy Cole, Les Ferdinand, Alan Shearer, all considered great goal scorers. They had one of the most skillful players of the pre-Barclays era Premier League in David Ginola. Faustino Asprilla was, of course, such an iconic sort of... was up to various things off the pitch. He was almost like the original Mario Balotelli, I think, Asprilla, but still an iconic player.
But he could play.
Unbelievable player. Albert as well, the conquering Batty and people like that. So they're playing drought of what are Newcastle come back once again. I think that we almost forget and for all the kind of tongue-in-cheek about the Saudis, they haven't gone out and spent a massive amount of money. They've spent money, but they've not spent like what you'd expect Saudi money to be. And they've also brought in a young English manager to kind of try and take him and them to the next level, which is the job I think he fully deserved after the defeat at Bournemouth. And it's a fake as well, more than anything. A lot of people would say the same about Liverpool when they finally got their hands on a Premier League title and the success that they've had under Klopp and now on year. You'd say the same. Money, for instance, yeah, okay, they're reaping some of the rewards. They just football is their passion, hobby. Now it's kind of all gone.
I think it's a great point you make about. You listed like those kind of iconic Barclays Newcastle players, and it always strikes me that when people talk about the Newcastle side, obviously the main line is you didn't win the league because you were 12 points clear, but there's so many sides, Ollie, that win league titles and you just forget about them. And in the fullness of time, people haven't forgotten about that, like Kevin Keegan will outscore you, Asprilla and Laura Bear and Ginola and Shearer. People haven't forgotten that side. And I'm not saying that's worth more than the title, because obviously it's not. But at the same time, to create a side that doesn't win anything that is still incredibly memorable is a kind of an odd feat in itself. So I'm pleased that kind of we lived through that in the 90s. And I'll never forget that Newcastle side, because it was part of when I started watching football, and it was just so fucking fun. So fun. And it's rare that you actually get a Premier League side like that, especially these days, I think, when everything's a little bit more chiseled and things like that. So yeah, it was an amazing side. Look, you know, 70 years is far too long for a football club like Newcastle to win a trophy. I think Eddie Howe is now a demonstration of why. I don't think he wanted the England job, but I think after Thomas Tuchel leaves in 18 months' time or 16 months' time, I think it has to be Eddie Howe for the England job after that. I think and it's not just based on the cup final against Liverpool. It's also based on the league form, how he presents itself, everything like that. And actually, if you look at Newcastle's run to the Carabao Cup final, I mean, they beat like a bunch of top sides. You know, knocked out Arsenal in a two-legged semi. So we're far and away the best side on the afternoon, Ollie. Absolutely no complaints as Liverpool fans have seen Newcastle win it. I do want to say this one thing. We sort of bitched about VAR before. Newcastle the best side, 100%. Rightfully won the trophy. But we're sort of 3 minutes into 7 minutes of added on time at the end of the 90. And Federico Chiesa scores. By the way, great goal. Suddenly Chiesa's reputation is kind of back there, and you're thinking, where has he been all season? Got to play him more. Looked really lively when he came on. Chiesa scores. Now, in a pre-VAR world, Ollie, Chiesa gets the ball, runs back, puts it on the centre circle, and the game carries on. And momentum is such a big part of football. I'm not saying Liverpool would have scored again. Maybe they wouldn't have done. Probably they wouldn't have done. But they might have done. And because there was like a 4-minute delay for a VAR check, which was absurd because he was clearly onside, it just killed the entire momentum. Newcastle could take a breath, reset. Eddie Howe got some messages across. They restructured and saw out the last 4 minutes. And I think that because of VAR, you're just going to see you're going to see way fewer of those kind of situations where a side scores, Chiesa gets the ball, sprints back to the halfway line, boom, it's on the spot, and referees saying, right, let's start again. So you lose that momentum. So that was just one thing that I took from it in terms of the end of the game. But look, I mean, full credit to Newcastle. Yeah, first trophy in 70 years. Wow.
Well, also there was like a weird, embarrassing moment where they announced the goal, and I don't really think these referee announcements are useful in terms of they're actually quite unclear when the referee's kind of going through it, because they're treating it like a robot. The goal for number 14 for Liverpool has been decreed. It's like, it's just say it's a goal, let's get on with it kind of thing. There's an embarrassing moment where Chiesa doesn't realise he's scored. He doesn't really know what, and the camera's on him, and he's like, wait, what? Okay, can I celebrate? Are we good? All right, okay, let's just get on. And then there's a weird, as you're talking about, the loss of momentum, but then Chiesa's like, well, I want to celebrate, I'm happy I've scored, and then he has to go back into, oh no, let's play. It's like a kind of, let's just crack on. It's all just unnecessary and ugly, and as it's ruining the game as an aesthetic as well as a process of the game. And one of the best things about football that people always say is it moves quickly, it flows well, and aesthetically, when top flight football is being played, it's great on the eye. Well, now if you've got the game not looking as good because of these slow, time-wasting periods of VAR analysis and then reaction to it and what's going on, it just continues to strip away. And of course we've got into grumpy old man mode 15 minutes into the podcast of bemoaning modern technology and VAR, but it is something worth noting of, like, it's been called a goal, he looks onside, fine, let's not get all the lines out and also go to micro analysis of it.
Yeah, and also, obviously what happened is the VAR officials are so terrified, they're so paranoid of making a mistake in a cup final that they're checking it and double checking it and doubting themselves and asking each other, which is why it took 3 or 4 minutes when it should have taken literally 10 seconds. And I think the thing is, when you're in a very senior position, you're essentially paid to make very good decisions very quickly in any walk of life. And if you can't do that, you're in the wrong job, because you're paid a lot of money. Presumably, the people operating VAR in a domestic cup final, that's right at the summit of what they're doing. And you were literally paid to make it was quite a simple decision, but you're paid to make it very quickly. And the fact they took so long over it, I just thought was absurd. But look, that's not the main takeaway from the final. The final's all about Newcastle. One thing I want to say, I don't know whether you saw the entirety of the game, Ollie, but Joe Linton, who I really like, I mean, the guy celebrated 4 tackles as if he'd scored. he was literally punching the air, and Gary Neville hilariously pointed it out on the first one. He was like, "Oh, that's number one," and at 2, he was like, "He's on the hat trick for the celebrations," and then he celebrates on the third time, and Gary Neville's saying, "There's the hat trick," and you could just sense a bit of the old man in Gary Neville being like, "This is absurd." And how far away are we for Virgil van Dijk winning a header and celebrating, or someone doing a 5-yard pass and celebrating? That is the individualization of the game. That's where we're going. I thought it was ridiculous. And Joe Linton's a player I like. That midfield 3 of Newcastle, you can make a pretty strong case that they're the best in the league as a 3. Mm-hmm. And I think it is. But there I am.
Just let people.
What next for Newcastle then, Ollie? How do they take this and go on and go on after this? Move forwards.
It's a big moment for the club in terms of getting their hands on some silverware. Now we're going to get after a few days, the detractors will be, well, it's only the Carabao Cup, isn't it? Like, who cares about the Carabao Cup these days? The first few rounds are a joke, etc. That would now happen, I think, if they won an FA Cup as well, which you would argue is slightly more prestigious than the League Cup, the EFL Cup as it has to be known now. But people would say, yeah, well, nobody cares about the FA Cup anymore. Now you've got to go and do something in Europe. Like, if Newcastle won the Conference League or the Europa League, people go, well, it's not the Champions League. So, I mean, yeah, there's always going to be naysayers that will belittle the accomplishments. I think for Newcastle, the best thing is that they've got some silverware. I don't think it's going to launch them into a stratosphere of people going, right, well, can they start challenging for a Premier League title? Because I don't think Newcastle are in that spot at this point. And I think
why not?
Maybe. Well,
6th in the Premier League, Saudi back, great coach, a team on the up, just won their first trophy.
But that's the thing. I don't think you would look at that and go, we need to immediately jump to this process. I think you would believe in the process of development and growth that's got them to winning a first piece of silverware. But I wouldn't sit at the start of next season and go, well, how about Newcastle? Unless they went and spent inordinate amounts of money, then you could argue that. But if they're not spending the money like they haven't really done in comparison to bigger sides in the Premier League, then I wouldn't say that this cup final victory has to jump them into the stratosphere if they should be pushing. Champions League football is the next thing for Newcastle, but I think that's been the modus operandi for the Saudis since they came in, and for Eddie Howe since he came in, that you have to be consistently putting us into a position to be fighting for European football and Champions League football. So I think that's always going to be the next goal for Newcastle. Then once they establish themselves as that, then it maybe becomes, right, what can you do in terms of a Premier League title? But I don't think this cup final changes how people will or should look at them.
It's also interesting how, as we've said before, 5 places will be awarded for English sides in the Champions League next season. Now, if Newcastle were to get 5th, obviously that would please the owners and please everyone at the football club, clearly. But actually, as you say, Ollie, if Newcastle would have finished 6th or 7th and go to the Europa League or the Conference League, I mean, they'd be one of the favourites to win either of those competitions. And all of a sudden, you're looking at that, I think, as a fan and thinking, if they're in the Conference League, Newcastle, they'd be favourites to win it, right? And if they're in the Europa League, they'd be one of the favourites to win it. So I don't think it's the end of the world if Newcastle don't finish top 5. They finished 6th or 7th this season. They're currently 6th in what is a very congested battle between Chelsea and 4th, right down to Bournemouth in 10th.
And again, we're talking about a pretty rogue Premier League table right now. So let's say Ruben Amorim does start to turn things around at Manchester United. Let's say whoever comes in after Postecoglou at Tottenham starts to change things. There are sides that you would expect to be fighting up for a top 6. You'd look at Brighton, Aston Villa. They probably have expectations to push for European football of some sort. So what is now a very congested table, if Forest can sustain this year's performances and take that into next year, you've got 8 sides, perhaps with aspirations of top 6, maybe even top 5. Suddenly nothing's really guaranteed again for those 8 teams, so it becomes very tough, and that's when Newcastle might have to start spending the Saudi money to separate themselves and have that kind of wheat from the chaff, which I hope doesn't happen, because I like the way they've gone about business so far, but it seems almost inevitable if you've got that money in the back pocket waiting to be spent, so to speak.
I think what it would do if Newcastle finished in the Champions League spot, Ollie, it would pretty much guarantee that they wouldn't have to offload anyone, because you've got that money coming in. So just from the point of view of keeping Isak and 1 or 2 others, it would obviously be massive if they could finish in that top 5. And I agree with you in the sense that because it's been a quote-unquote poor Premier League season, I mean, there's so many sides, Newcastle, Man United and Tottenham and Villa, that all think they should have had better sort of league seasons, I would say. So, yeah, City, Chelsea probably feel likewise. So, yeah, I mean, next season it's going to be very interesting because I think there's 10 sides that will be kind of contesting for 5 spots. Elsewhere in the footballing world over the weekend, Ollie.
Yeah, let's talk about Arsenal fans who are almost getting sick and tired. I was speaking to an Arsenal fan. Want to hear about about Arsenal still being within touching distance to this Liverpool side, and I don't think they are. Points is the fact that they've beaten Chelsea just keeps the narrative going. Maybe something can happen, and I think there's quite a few Arsenal fans now sick and hoping that just kill it off. Let's just fight for Champions League football, fight to hold for second place. Let's not keep the narrative going of maybe. And beating Chelsea has become a frustration this weekend for some, rather than a glorious 1-0 victory.
I think because it's 12 points, it's just a bit too much. But if it was 7, 8, or 9, with the two sides still to play each other, with 9 games left, you might think it's still possibly on. But the 12 just makes it so difficult for Arsenal. You know, you throw in the fact that Saka's going to come back off the international break, that he's obviously not going to play every game. And I think if you're Arteta as well, you've got to hedge your bets. And I think the chances of winning the Premier League for them are probably about 1%, and the chances of them winning the Champions League are maybe like 15%, 20%, something like that. You know, the 2 legs against Real Madrid now. Real Madrid are Real Madrid in the Champions League, but they're not. They are beatable. I mean, we saw Atletico go incredibly close, and we haven't spoken about the Julian Alvarez penalty, have we, Ollie? I don't think. I mean, maybe let's touch on it now. I don't know what to say. I mean, Julian Alvarez, does he touch it twice? Maybe, maybe not. I've watched it 10 times. I can't really see. I think possibly he does at the 10th viewing. But equally, how are VAR getting involved in that? Like, how are they getting involved in that? I don't know. And if you're an Atletico Madrid fan, I mean,
sick.
My God, you could be forgiven for thinking there's a conspiracy.
It just feels sick. And it couldn't happen in a worse game for VAR and for UEFA as well, to have it in a Madrid derby in the knockout stage of the Champions League. Like, if it was against like Fenerbahce or somebody, you wouldn't suspect that there's any sort of nefarious foul play or anything like that. But the fact that it's Real Madrid, and there's almost this seemingly desire to keep the wheels turning for Real Madrid, some would argue, when it comes to UEFA competitions, and keeping them at the top of the pile and adding to their incredible record in the Champions League. I'm not saying there is. I personally don't think that is a thing at all. But yeah, as you say, Atleti fans will look at that and go, like, really, we're getting into this sort of silly penalisation of something that's so unclear. And that's what VAR again was meant to bring in, to clarity, not to lord over moments where it's ambiguous. And that's the thing. There's VAR step in, bring out clear, and it's. Yeah. Game's gone, Windsor. We'll say it before, we'll say it again. Game's gone.
Southampton have 9 points. They're not very good. Now, how about this for an idea? If you finish a Premier League season with less than 10 points, with less than double digits, you get relegated down 2 tiers. So you drop down to League One. If you cannot get 10 points in the Premier League, you're not even trying, and that should be punished accordingly. So if Southampton finish with 9 points, they should drop down to League One, and they should bypass the Championship completely as punishment and as a warning to future sides that when you get promoted, you have to at least get 10 points. You have to be part of the conversation. You have to be attempting to win football matches. What do we think about that? Absurd?
I think that is ludicrous, David. Absolutely ludicrous. What I think is if you want to go down this route, if you finish with fewer than 10 points in a Premier League season, you have that number of points that you came away with in that Premier League season as a point deduction at the start of the Championship season. So if you have 9 points, you start the next Championship season on -9. That would be... because you can't have dropping down 2 tiers. That messes up all the relegation stuff. But if you are so unbelievably poor in the top tier of English football, right, fine, 9-point deduction. Because the system kind of favours sides to be there or thereabouts once they've come down from the Premier League. We've seen that over the years, that there are so many teams now that are a bit yo-yo-y. You go up, you come back down. But because of all the financial parachute payments and whatnot, there is a bit of an us and them starting to be created in the Championship now. So to even it out, if you are terrible, you don't get. You start with a negative points deduction for the next season, or you don't get your financial parachute payments, or you get them like stripped back like 50% or something.
I like your first option. I think I agree that the dropping down 2 divisions is probably too extreme, and as you say, it would just create this weird domino effect that's a mess. I mean, by equal measure, by the way, I've long been an advocate that if you finish with over 100 points in your European league, you should be transferred to another European league for the next season. So if Manchester City get 100 points, you should have to play in La Liga next season. I've long thought that was the best solution, because it's so rare to get 100 points, by the way. I mean, I know Real Madrid did it under Mourinho, City have done it once under Guardiola. Like, it's incredibly rare, and if it happens, then I think you're out of that league for at least. You get the honour of competing in La Liga.
Just wants to burn the world. Disruption and disorder. Right, what else was taking a note in that? I mean, I should probably mention this just because it caught my eye on BBC Sport today, Ollie. I don't know whether you saw this, but there was a minute's silence held for Petko Ganchev in Bulgaria, right? But the problem is he didn't die. So there was a minute's silence held for a player that they thought had died and hadn't died. So he had to inform the club after the minute's silence had taken place, which I thought was pretty crazy. I mean, that's
some kind of research, maybe call him, or there was apparently like a news report where they said he died, that everyone was there mourning his loss, and he wasn't dead. Pretty weird.
That's especially in the world. Like, he could have just tweeted one tweet, like, not dead, by the way before the minute's silence gets taken. So he's obviously, I kind of rate that he's so disconnected with the news and social media that he hasn't realised, because there has to be a bit of time between them, somebody saying he's dead, to the club then deciding that they're going to do a minute's silence. And at no point has anybody heard anything from him, from the football club. So he's so disconnected from the news club that he's let it ride. Yeah, that's weirdly embarrassing.
But the cynic in me, Ollie, the cynic in me doesn't believe that it's possible in this day and age for them to make that error. So it makes me think they've done it for some kind of social media traction and clout or attention. I mean, it's just so cynical. Why would you do that? It's a pretty risque joke. But at the same time, I don't even know how it's possible. Like in the report, it says that the player, Ganchev, walked into his front door. I guess he had his phone off, and his wife greeted him crying, shouting, "Petko, Petko, they announced on TV you've died." He said, "I couldn't understand what she was telling me, what had happened. Then 2 of my friends called me." And then the club released a statement saying, "Look, sometimes things happen, but the situation's not easy." It's like, no, these things don't happen. Like, they don't happen, so, yeah, I don't know. Weird one.
Is there another point where an athlete has been presumed dead and then not, like, is there a more high-profile version of this? I don't think there has been an athlete at, like, top-level sport.
You should be deducted points for it, or you should be banned from being able to hold a minute's silence for the next, decade.
Let's is deserving, that's for sure. Like, we see so many minute silences taking place in football grounds and sporting events, and some of them you're like, is this a minute silence worthy? Like, a round of applause maybe,
so
or something?
This is the natural evolution of that.
It's the quick desire to be seen as having the minute's silence, but without really checking, just hearing like, oh god, that's happened. Right, well, better have a minute's silence. Oh, it didn't. Oh. I want to know what their mascot is, because one of the best social media accounts is mascots paying tribute, where you've got like the West Bromwich Albion boiler stood there on the Remembrance Sunday trying to look humble and like bowing to pay tribute during the minute's silence. It's so weird.
Amazing account.
So
amazing
weird.
Account.
Other news in the world of sport are you looking for, Dave? Because we have to.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some tennis. You've probably got some golf for us, Mr. Wilson. Why don't you go with the golf, or what you've got in the locker?
We have to kick off with Rory McIlroy's victory at the Players' Championship, which, if you're unaware of the importance of the Players' Championship, it is considered the unofficial 5th major of the calendar year in golf. So it's a huge competition held at TP Sawgrass every single year. It's got the iconic heart-shaped 17th green that's an island green
which when the wind gets blowing, or depending on where they put the pin position, it's an absolute nightmare. And we saw so many players going into the water over the weekend unable to hit the island green. And it's one of the most iconic, as I say, events on the PGA Tour calendar. And Rory McIlroy's 4 shots down going into the final day, and Rory, by hook or by crook, finds his way within the first 12 holes to being up in a 1-shot lead and leading the tournament. Mightily impressive indeed. And then we have this big, long rain delay, which is obviously really difficult. They get very paranoid with things like if there's lightning or anything like that, you can't hold a golf tournament, you can't have anything taking place. They do it in the US a lot. If there's any chance of lightning, everybody has to just leave and go and come back when the lightning stops, basically. Even if it's only 10 miles away, they still kind of shut things down. And they have this delay, they have this break, it gets very wet as well, which isn't ideal. And Rory comes back and he's just not quite there for the final few holes. He just starts to lose his mettle a bit, and JJ Spawn, who's in second place, is able to tie. I think it was on the 16th he got a birdie. Rory goes par to finish, so he and Spawn are level, but there's not enough time in the day on the Sunday to be able to hold the 3-hole playoff that they use to decide the golf competition. So everybody had to come back on the Monday morning for them to tee off and do this 3-hole playoff. And unfortunately, I missed this because I was on the flight out to Miami. But by all accounts, Rory wins it with birdie, bogey, which is not really like a hyper-competitive, like 2 bogeys in 3 holes for someone like Rory McIlroy is not great, to be honest. So to win it with birdie, bogey, slightly, I guess it kind of kills off the drama slightly, but he's able to get past JJ Spawn. And it's another competition, it's another big competition this year that Rory has been able to, much like he did at Pebble Beach, just grind through the final day and come away with a big victory in a big PGA tournament. And it's just setting up with the Masters round the corner for Rory to have this big year.
Next month, right? No, when's the Masters?
Next month, yeah.
Okay.
In April. So we're 4 weeks away from Rory maybe finally completing the Majors Grand Slam, of winning every single one. He just needs to get the Masters and ending the what will be like 11-year drought now of a major victory. And it's primed for him. He just needs to hold his nerve a little bit more. But it was a great competition this weekend. Yeah, superb from McIlroy, just showing his best in some clutch moments. Give us a sporting
prediction then for McIlroy. Is he going to do it?
I think so. I think he'll win a major. I don't know about the Masters. The Masters is so tough, and I also think there's still that something in his head of he's not ready to win that tournament yet, in terms of he has been grinding out these big victories this year, and he's been at the top of his game and arguably the best driver of the ball in the last 5 years quite comfortably. But he's been holding off people like Scotty Scheffler at various points, even though Scotty's the world number 1 and is probably the best golfer at the moment out there. But Rory's right up there with him. He just doesn't have that big breakthrough moment. I just don't think it'll come in the Masters. I think it'll come in like a PGA Championship or a US Open this year. And I think he does break the majors drought. And I think that'll be big for giving him confidence then for 2026. Having then the confidence of, right, I've won that major. That's hoodoos away from me. Let's go and attack the Masters. And I think it might be another 12 months before he wins it. I could be wrong. He could easily do it this year. But I just don't think it's in the stars yet.
Just before I talk about a little bit of tennis to wrap up, Ollie, I did also want to mention the England squad for this international break. Like, obviously not a particularly exciting international break, but the fact that Thomas Tuchel's taking charge for the first time, and the fact that his squad has included, Jordan Henderson, Marcus Rashford, a couple of other omissions that maybe people were a little bit sceptical about. I suppose Jordan Henderson's the one that you look at and you think, that's unusual. And it made me think 2 things: the fact that Jordan Henderson somehow made it back into the squad. I don't watch Dutch football, so I don't know, and nobody watches Dutch football, presumably apart from Thomas Tuchel, in terms of an England perspective, watching Dutch football, right? So he obviously knows more than we do, because he watches Henderson for Ajax and we don't. The second thing is that there's a man that he's not playing to the crowd, as in Tuchel's decided to bring Henderson back, even though he surely knows it's a deeply unpopular move. So I don't know. I think he's his own man, Thomas Tuchel. It's an 18-month contract. There's no legacy here. There's no building for the next 2 or 3 tournaments. There's no reputation. There's nothing like that. Thomas Tuchel was brought in to do a certain thing, and he's obviously decided, for whatever reason, that Jordan Henderson needs to be part of the setup at this time. It's an unusual one because you can't really believe that Jordan Henderson's going to the World Cup next summer. I personally don't believe that's part of Thomas Tuchel's plans. But he's brought him in now for some reason to coax something out of other players, presumably.
Well, I would have thought it's one of those moves where you bring him in because he's a great team guy as well. And I think that might be one of the reasons why you wouldn't actually dismiss Thomas Tuchel taking him to a World Cup. If you're one of those older, experienced guys in that squad, I mean, Jordan Henderson's been through a lot of it with England, obviously over the last few years, etc. The ability to understand and know tournament football, know the attitude and the mentality you need to have. Jordan Henderson might be as valuable as a depth player, but around the camp, as he is actually being out there on the field at various points. I think the phrase you use sums it up perfectly, that Thomas Tuchel is showing that he's his own man. I think that's massively important. Not going with public sway, public opinion, having your own idea and sticking with it. And hopefully we kind of see this continue throughout his brief tenure in charge of the England national team. But I don't dislike it. I like having the odd experienced veteran in, the kind of rogue call-up, in the same way we saw it last time with the the kind of rogue under-21 call-ups that were suddenly coming into the England squad. I think it's a good thing to shake things up. I don't want a team that thinks they know the 25-man squad that's going out to any major tournament and their name is kind of guaranteed on the team sheet. I don't want that. Make everybody raise their eyebrows and go, okay, we can't sit around and rest on this manager being the guy who's just going to guarantee me 90 minutes of football every single time out. So I don't mind it at all.
It also opens an intriguing little window for Ivan Toney, who we pitched before as going to the 2026 World Cup. But I think if you're Ivan Toney, you're looking at that and you're thinking, interesting. If Jordan Henderson, who's playing out in Holland, is back in that World Cup squad, like, why can't I, if I keep scoring goals in Saudi Arabia, get back in the England squad? So, yeah, I don't know. It's an unusual one.
I think Ivan Toney will 100% be on the plane with England out to the next World Cup.
But if that was the case, Ollie, then why doesn't Tuchel pick him? I mean, he's scoring goals for fun in Saudi Arabia, so why not pick him now? Why isn't he in this squad? Maybe
it's not the kind of thing Tuchel needs to see right now. Maybe he needs to mix it up more, some of the midfield roles, etc. And then coming up in an international break further down the line is when he starts to dabble with the strike force and have a look at some other players. And also, Ivan Toney's still only been there for, 2/3 of a season, right? You want to see a bit more in terms of, okay, you're doing it for this long, but let's see if this goal-scoring consistency... If the goal-scoring consistency lasts over 12 months, then you're like, well, it's really difficult to look away from Ivan Toney. He's obviously got the finishing touch, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else. The sad thing for Thomas Tuchel is he's having to pay attention to Saudi football probably as well, which I don't think, again, many people are in the UK at this point, but Thomas Tuchel's doing his due diligence. And again, don't you rate that as a manager? I'd love to see Tuchel, midweek out a rogue Ajax game in midweek, then he's on the next flight out to Saudi Arabia just to have a look and have a chat with Ivan Toney, and then comes back and then looking at the Premier League game on a Sunday. I think that's awesome for a football manager to do, especially an England manager, to keep all options open and available. And if you're a form forward, you cannot look that and turn that away going into a major competition, particularly when we already discussed the other week the lack of out forwards that we really do truly possess.
If you're Eddie Howe, do you want England to win the 2026 World Cup? Deep down. Because if you're Eddie Howe and England win the 2026 World Cup, I don't know what's in it for him being the next England manager if they've already won the World Cup. But if England fall short, as historically you would suggest is
gonna happen.
It is going to happen. I mean, that will probably happen. It just creates this opportunity where Eddie Howe can walk into a squad that's a pretty young, exciting squad that have failed to achieve under Southgate and Tuchel then. So, I don't know, if you're Eddie Howe, from the bottom of your heart, do you want England to win that World Cup?
I don't think Eddie Howe's that cynical a man that he's like, I want to be the guy. It just doesn't come across that way. I don't know him personally. I wouldn't be able to say. You always want to be the guy, particularly with the drought that we've had in terms of success with the national team for the men. You want every manager that takes that job wants to be the guy that changes it. I think there would actually be a very deflating atmosphere around Thomas Tuchel doing it, because it would be, oh, well, we finally got the guy that saved us. And he's like, I've done my part. I'll see you later. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Bag of Ants, but Will Smith plays a golf caddy for Matt Damon, and basically Matt Damon is suffering from post-World War I PTSD. The US is going through the Great Depression as well. Matt Damon comes back, he's an alcoholic. He meets Bagger Vance, and Bagger, Will Smith, kind of gets playing back to his best golf that he's ever played once again. And then right on the final round, Will Smith's character's like, right, that's where I'm going to leave you. And it's like, what? How dare you? Like, you've just got me to overcome everything in my life. And now suddenly you're going to leave me? And he's like, I've done all I can do. And Thomas Tuchel is the Bagger Vance of the England national team if they win the World Cup. And he just leaves because he's like, I've taken you where you needed to go. Now it's somebody else needs to carry on the journey. It's like, no, you stick around and we give you another £8 million a year contract to keep doing this. We're running it back. You can't run away from this thing right now.
I also think there's a potential nice narrative as well, assuming England do not win the 2026 World Cup. If Eddie Howe's the man who ended Newcastle's 70-year trophy drought, and then he goes into England and they're 60 years without a trophy, I think there's a nice potential arc for him to.
He's the man to do it.
Yeah. He could be like the man who stops. Next thing you know, he's at Benfica trying to end their 100-year curse or whatever they have in European club football. Right, let's wrap up with some tennis, Mr. Wilson. Just want to say one thing. Jack Draper won at Indian Wells this week. Jack Draper's a 23-year-old Brit, born in London, 6'4", 6'5", massive serve. He's a slam champion in the future, no doubt about that. And I think we've had a couple of kind of false dawns, maybe with like Raducanu after Murray, and kind of waiting for the next best big thing in British tennis. This is 100% it. Indian Wells it matters because it's an ATP 1000 event, which is like the highest level of event outside of the slams, arguably of all the tournaments in the world. Outside the slams, it's the one you want to win, kind of not dissimilar to a kind of players' championship in golf. And yeah, he beat Carlos Alcaraz in the semi-finals, destroyed Holger Rune in the final. And the upcoming clay season is not going to be great, I don't think, for Jack Draper, because clay's not really a surface. But crucially for a Brit, he'll be great on grass with that massive serve. And I think that we could see something fun could be happening at Wimbledon this year. I think. I think the Drape, we had the Henman Hill and the Murray Mound, which never quite sits in terms of alliteration the same way. So get racking your brain for the Jack Draper Hill or whatever, however it's going to work. But yeah, he's definitely exciting, and I think obviously most people don't care about tennis except for Wimbledon, and so he's kind of lucky that he's hit peak form this year. He's up to 7 in the world. He's got that massive serve. He suits the grass. He's lucky as a Brit that it's a surface that's really going to be kind to him, I think.
Great job in being the English journalist managing expectations here, Dave. I mean, you've just set him up for he has to win it. We're going to get closer and closer to Wimbledon, and there will be a point where you come out in this podcast and go, Jack Draper has to win it. He has to win Wimbledon. I will put money on him making the final. This is where your giddy tennis love is just going to start to snowball and snowball. Look, it's amazing. Indian Wells, as you say, it's the unofficial 5th major of tennis. It is a massive event, and to turn up and impress at a young age, it's great. But the hardest thing to do is to impress early and then sustain it. And it's an interesting 6 months, let alone 18 months now for Jack Draper of expectational rise. And it's not just going to be the same quite as Raducanu winning obviously the US Open. Like, this is slightly different. It is still an ATP 1000. It's not one of the big majors, but it's still just all right. You've taken the next step up. Now you need to stay on that step. We don't want to see you drop down. And what can you do on this next one on home court?
Also, like, the Raducanu situation is very complicated. She's been super unlucky with injuries and other things. So it's a very nuanced situation, I think, with Emma Raducanu. But undeniably, the narrative outside to in is that you took too many brand deals, you took too many sponsorship deals, your face is everywhere. You basically got distracted. And I would say with Jack Draper, I mean, he's a pretty boy, Ollie. Like, he's got a nice face. He's a pretty boy. So when someone says, "Oh, can you just do 2 days shooting for us, Jack?" For Haagen-Dazs or like Mercedes or something like that. Is there any chance we can just get you away on a little shoot? And his agent's thinking, "Well, I get 10% of that deal." And Jack Draper's thinking, "Well, I'd only miss a session there actually, and my physio there. Maybe I could move that around." So these things start to come into play in the modern game. And he's got to be careful. He's got to be careful.
Well, you'll also have can we get you and Emma together pre-Wimbledon? That month between those two will both be pulled into the same marketing campaigns. We're going to serve up an ace. like all that cheesy stuff. I mean, you can just see it coming.
And I'll be buying that ice cream, you know. Like, if you can get Raducanu and Draper as like a brand deal together, massive eyeballs on it.
For the strawberries and cream ice cream as well. I mean, that's the one going into Wimbledon. Haagen-Dazs, we've set the marketing table for you already. You just need to go and make it happen now.
I mean, mate, if you could get Raducanu feeding Jack Draper like a strawberries and cream, you're on big money. Anyway, I'll probably...
No. You need Ben and Jerry's to have their ice cream flavour Emma Radu Can Do, because she's got that can do attitude, and it's like, I don't know, strawberries and cream and waffle bites in it for the British Wimbledon twist. That's the one. Yeah.
It's definitely one to keep an eye on. I think it's it's gonna be a fun Wimbledon. Maybe we'll try and get Ollie and I know a couple of pretty successful, great tennis commentators. So maybe we'll get one of those on before Wimbledon. We'll do like a tennis special, Ollie, in
just
late June or something.
Just finally, as all the freaking sports cars are revving up and down the street behind me, Formula 1 kicked off this weekend. Lando Norris takes the victory in an absolutely helter-skelter race. We had rain coming down, which made the track so difficult, because particularly as it's it's a public park that they race through. It's not a motor racing track, so the surface is even slicker when the water comes out. And we had a great battle going down the final few laps, basically, of Lando Norris and Max Verstappen separated by about half a second going toe-to-toe. We had Lewis Hamilton struggling in the Ferrari. There was a pretty damning moment when his new teammate Charles Leclerc overtakes him towards the end of the race, and you can just see Hamilton's not happy with that new car already, and there's already conversation about how Lewis isn't enjoying his first few months at Ferrari, which is never a good sign, because Lewis will tell you when he's not enjoying it. And the Mercedes of George Russell coming in third, just another great young British driver who, if Mercedes can get things right and get a bit more within touching distance, they're about 7-8 seconds adrift of the front two. We are so set for a phenomenal year, and the fact that McLaren have the best car but Max Verstappen is probably the best driver right now in Formula 1 is a really interesting kind of showdown of, is it the driver or the car that will get you a world championship? And there are others to enter the equation as well as the teams continue to develop. And if you go and check the highlights on YouTube, on the F1 YouTube channel of what happened in Australia, it's too frantic to really break down completely. But what it has done is set up this F1 season perfectly. We could be looking at a 2021 sort of scenario again going down to the final race. It's early. It's very early to say in a 24 race season, but it has set the bar very high indeed for the entertainment value that we're going to get this year.
What's the time now in Miami? It's like morning, right?
No, it's 10 to 1. It's a 4-hour time difference.
Okay. So what does the afternoon have in store, Ollie? Is it just mojitos and mingling with the LATAM crowd down there, or is it family responsibilities this afternoon, or what's going on?
Going up to the 17th floor swimming pool to do some laps. We did the gym this morning, gym session at 10 a.m.
The Wilsons on tour, just still giving to the...
It was great because like my fiance's out here obviously with me, and she wanted to go to the gym too, so we went up and did an hour and a half, 2 hours in the gym, went back downstairs, grabbed some sushi from the restaurant just down near the apartment block, and then up to the pool for some laps and some chilling. So yeah, pretty quality.
And when are you going to hit the golf course? Are you going to be able to?
Yeah, we're booked in tomorrow. Don't worry. 2 o'clock in the afternoon tea time. No, she's coming with.
The caddy? Who's she playing?
No, she's playing. We've brought her clubs out. Yeah.
No, and how do you offer like technical advice?
Not a chance.
On a swing, or is that no?
I wouldn't dare. I'm emotional support on the golf course, as she is for me. That's how we hold each other up.
Play it.